What about you? And in the garage today we have a Toyota Celica. This thing would have been born around the year 2000, something like that. And yeah, young fella owns it and thinks it's great. So a young fella bought this and he bought it basically the way it is. He didn't do anything to it, you know. So he just took one look at it. It's been resprayed green and this white sort of stuff all over the place. And in the boot here, there is a suitcase. I don't know. Well, I take it he put that there, but doubt where he bought that with it. But yeah, there's been a few modifications. Have been a few modifications to this car. There's a big, massive exhaust on it, and we'll take a wee look under the bonnet. Yeah. So there's a huge exhaust on it. It is really loud, this car. And the complaint is that it has poor idle, and the idle's all over the place. It goes up and down, idles really badly, erratically, hunting, and he's complaining that sometimes when he comes to a junction, puts a clutch in, the revs go way up to about 1500 revs, even 2000 revs he mentioned. So it's revs are all over the place, and he says that he's nearly rear-ended somebody as a result of this high revving. Whenever he lifts off the throttle, the thing just wants to keep going. So yeah, that's dead on. But the problem I have with this car is there's no airbox. Airbox is missing. We have this intake tube here, and in the bottom of the wing is one of them cone filters, which is just a sponge really, and it's residing way down low in there in the bottom of the wing. And as a result, we have a few tubes that aren't connected, and there's a connector there, not connected. So we got her up to temperature, took it for a run, verified the complaint, and had a wee look at the log. So the way it is at the minute, I have this car fixed, but I'm just doing this sort of recap video and, you know, take you through what I did, what I found, and how I resolved it. But first of all, wait till you hear this. Now, this is the thing, modified cars. I hate modified cars because sure shooting, the modification, you know, you need to think to yourself, well, that's the problem there. You know, that dopey intake tube, there's a problem with that. But wait till you hear this. So this thing is really loud, and so at first I thought maybe there's no cat in this, O2's removed, you know, something like that. So the guy told me that as soon as he started up, whenever he was going to buy it, as soon as it started up, he was sold. That's it. I want this. So to say, this car's fixed, and I'm going to get the scanner hooked, set up for you here, and then we can see a wee bit of live data. And sure, I'll just show you what, you know, basically I looked at the fuel trims, idle, MAF, all that sort of stuff, you know, pretty basic stuff really. So here's a wee bit of data, and this is long-term trim, short-term trim, MAF, and that's engine speed there. So there's a couple of throttle blips. Engine's up to temperature, by the way. There's 639 RPM, very, you know, low idle here. 639 there most of the time. And we'll just fast forward that a wee bit. And if this doesn't come out very well on camera, I'll put it on the big screen. So we can move this blue line across there, and hopefully. So sometimes it works. No, not gonna work. I'll just scroll it forward. So at that point there, we blip the throttle. So it's wide open throttle, 2000 revs. And over here, we're showing there minus 4.6. So we'll blip the throttle, the short-term trim went negative, and the long-term trim fell away as well. So that would be indicative of a vacuum leak for sure. So you blip the throttle, but there's a bit of strange things going on with this. You know, I'll tell you what happened. Whenever I turned the key on, the trims were both 0. So the short-term trim rose away up, and it rose away up higher than what it's showing on the graph here. It rose away up to, 14, 15, something like that, and then that put up the long-term trim. So the long-term trim starts to come up, and then the short-term then depletes. But if you add the two together, you get a positive value. So it was showing a positive value, but when I blipped the throttle, it dipped away down here and dipped away down here, and we can see that's reflected on the MAF. You can see a big gulpy air there on the MAF. So that was all right. Pretty indicative of a vacuum leak for sure, but I wasn't just convinced that it was a vacuum leak. Now another wee problem with this car is because this is a 2000 year car, the data here was very, very slow. Like, I was blipping the throttle and you didn't see it for like a second later. So that was pretty bad, and that was only with 4 PIDs up. So yeah, so that was all right. So how did I determine that it's not a vacuum leak? Well, that's a good question. It didn't show itself. It didn't react immediately. It didn't drop away down. We're going negative there with that one. I'll try this moving the cursor again. And no, I just can't do it on the touchscreen. We'll bring it back to there. So that's showing, it's off the screen there, it's minus 7.7, but we still have the long term at 14 there. So yeah, so you see it's dropped away down there. Now our revs are, that's at idle, 673 there. So yeah, so it's just dropping away down there by itself. So that's the erratic nature of this. So it's just doing that on its own. I don't necessarily have to blip the throttle to get the trim to come down. So yeah, so at this dip here, there's nothing going on anywhere else in the graph. So you can see there's nothing here at all. The long term staying there, but more importantly, engine RPM. It's just after a wide open throttle, but it's going back 673 there. So it's going up and down on its own. It's erratic, it's hunting. So yeah, so we took the diagnosis a wee bit further, and yeah, it's all to do with that intake. Big intake thing. Here's another thing I noticed. There's a pipe here that it's just open to the air. So there's unfiltered air getting in there. Right. The big foam sponge filter that's down in the lower wing, there's no protection around it at all. So I took all that off thinking that, it's going to be blocked up, caked up with mud. This car sits quite low to the deck. So you get a bunch of water in here, water's going to fly in and just, get soaked up by that foam air filter, or so-called air filter. So this system here is the problem here. It's the cause of it. But the reason why the thing was humping was this is a manually controlled cable throttle. This bit down here is the idle air control valve, and on the other side of that, you can't see it, as a throttle position sensor. So this throttle plate on this needs to be closed, and the idle air control valve then is controlled by the ECM, and that controls your idle. If the throttle plate isn't sealing, as it were, then there's air getting in at idle from this way, and there's air getting in through the idle air control valve. So the idle air control valve is basically a bypass. If you imagine there's a hole on this side of the throttle plate, and then there's a hole on this side of the throttle plate, and then that's controlled. So it's like a bypass. It bypasses the flap. So if the flap, however, is sitting a wee bit open, because it's not controlled, in this case it's not controlled by the ECU, it's only controlled by a cable. So it's a bit dopey, you know. So so if the flap is open slightly due to muck, debris, dirt, contamination, then there's air getting in there, and there's air getting into the air control valve, and the ECU struggles to to get a good consistent idle. So the guy told me that whenever he came off throttle, the revs went the way up. And I didn't really see that, but that is also indicative of his throttle plate isn't closing. So whenever he comes off throttle, his throttle plate isn't closing, and it's still allowing air. So you would nearly think it's a sticky throttle, but it's not sticky. It's just the fact that it's not closing properly. It's not sealing. So simply took that off, took the throttle body off, give it a good clean out. It was stinking with carb cleaner. Put it back together again, and we'll have a wee look at our fuel trims now. As I said earlier on, this data is a bit blocky, and it's because of the communication of the car. And believe it or not, a wee handheld device, the simplest of tools that just as OBD only, actually gives it a better refresh rate, believe it or not. So we'll take this for a wee drive here, get her up to temperature, warm it up, and look at the trims again. So, I don't know why you can hear me now. This is why this guy bought this car, because of the noise of it. Oh, wait a minute, up. It is definite. And it's going a lot better too. It's far more responsive. If we pull in, it's just sitting revving nicely. No hunting. And all it needed was a clean out. So here we are after that wee run, and we're sitting cooling temperature 91 degrees. We're in closed loop. Well, that's another thing. Whenever the fuel trims were bad, it seemed to take an awful long time to get into closed loop. So you turn the car off and turn the car on again, it was back in the open loop again, and had to sit for about 5 minutes, even though it was still warm. So now it goes into closed loop really, really quickly. So it's a significant difference. And our short term is down to, well, let's jump on 1.60. The long term is 6. So yeah, car would probably do a service actually, but yeah, a vast difference, and the RPM is sitting at in around the 700. So fast forward a couple of weeks, and the lad took my advice. I think what I said to him about the cone filter being down in the bottom of the wing, and the possibility of picking up a load of water and destroying his engine, really motivated him to get a new airbox and a new hose, and with it came a genuine MAF sensor. So with a new filter in it, and we have removed that. So that was in the car with a MAF sensor that has no markings on it whatsoever. So I take it that's an aftermarket MAF sensor, and this contraption here, which didn't seal very well at all, and with that cone filter, which was damp whenever it came in, whenever I took it out. So that was soaking wet. So we'll have a wee look at the trims now. There we go. car's up to temperature. There's the fuel trims there. Long time 3, short term hovering around 2, 0. Yeah. So vast improvement. It's pretty stable at 700 RPM and around that. So yeah. So throttle body clean and do away with that aftermarket stuff there. So yeah. So I'm pretty happy with that. That's the car's a lot more stable now. So no vacuum leak at all. And yeah. So that's it. Okay. I think the numbers speak for themselves. So thanks for watching. All the best. And bye bye.